Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for walking. That's a great start. Hey, everybody. It's Tim and Steve from Phantom History House. Thanks for watching. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. We have a lot to talk about tonight, and we have an amazing guest to share with you.
You are going to love it. We're talking about women of horror. So first, let me say welcome to Phantom History House Calls. All right, so everybody, thank you for watching. Wherever you're watching from, please type into the comments any questions you have for us or our guest, Cindy O'Quinn, who's going to be out here really shortly.
Yes, and let us know where you're watching from.
Absolutely. So a lot of very exciting stuff going on here for us.
Absolutely. And if you are a newsletter subscriber, you got kind of a sneak peek of what's going on here this Halloween season at Phantom History House. Today, we sent out a newsletter that kind of gave you an idea of what our calendar looks like. Some special deals, which we'll be sharing publicly tomorrow on some of our social media channels as well. And we kind of have a theme for this year.
That's right. We have mapped out the fall spooky season here at Phantom History House. This is something we've been talking about for a really long time.
Well, yeah, every time we have a guest stop by or a guest stay, they're always like, well, I bet Halloween is crazy here. What are you doing? So I think, we kind of want to make sure we're prepared for that.
So if you go to our website at phantomhistory.com, you will find on the events page a lot of the stuff that's going to be happening in the fall. But the exciting thing is we did come up sort of with our slogan, with our logo for the season. Here it is. Here it is, everybody.
Beautiful. And no sound to it, but beautiful.
Okay. So yeah, that's going to have sound later. But so we are we're doing blue because it's all about ghosts taking over Phantom History House this year.
Yeah, and we've been showing some clips like on social media, on Instagram and Facebook especially, about some of the work we've been putting in to bring the ghosts to life for this year's Halloween display. And our good friend Lee Vandergrift has been here quite a bit to help give them personality while I did the grunt work on that side of it. And they always get a lot of compliments because they're lined up along the backyard.
So here is a little short video showing some of the ghosts that we are preparing. And they're all going to be in the front of the house eventually, but here's a little video. Okay, so anyway, so we have ghosts, and blue is the color for our sort of logo and advertising for the Halloween season. We're very excited.
So we're going to call ourselves Phantasm History House for the Halloween season, but we're not changing our name. We are still Phantom History House, but that's just kind of our plan for the Halloween.
And the phantasm is like a ghost or a spirit.
Is a spirit. Yeah. And in our announcements today, and now on our Facebook events page, as well as our events page on our website, we shared plans for our big costume party this year. So if you are a fan of Halloween, which we know you are, if you've ever been here to Phantom History House, we are going to invite you to our costume party called a novel soiree.
A novel soiree. That's right, because we want everybody to dress as your favorite literary character.
Yes.
Like that's like, that could be a lot of people.
Yeah.
It could be anything.
The genre is wide open. I mean, and we kind of say that in the description. You could come as Harry Potter. You could come as Jay Gatsby. You could come as, whoever you want. That's, as long as they appeared in a book somewhere, we're good with it. So it'll be a whole lot of fun.
So anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Susan is watching, and Jack and Kristen and Stephen and Carol and Elijah. Yay, all these great people.
And hey, Tina Marie, good to see you. Our neighbor down the road here in Oldsmar.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're happy to see everybody. Is there anything else you want to add before we bring up our guests?
I guess just there's a lot going on. We're very excited about it. Don't forget that we have a summer special through August 22nd. Any room, any night, $125. And then, like we said, if you're a newsletter subscriber, we send out a special Halloween season discount code.
Absolutely. And we'll share that tomorrow on Facebook as well. So we'll share that with you. It's a limited time offer to kind of save a little bit of money for the Halloween season. And we announced our next two scavenger hunt and ghost story events. The first one was such a huge success. We've been asked to do it again. So we've actually planned two of them. One is August 23rd and the other one is October 4th, I believe.
Yeah, and they're all different clues. So if you've been to the first one, you can still come to these. But nobody's here to see us talk about all this stuff. Everybody's here to see Cindy O'Quinn, the lady of the hour, the woman of horror of the hour, right? I was thinking,
woman of the horror hour.
The woman of the horror hour. And there's Cindy. Hey, Cindy, how are you?
Oh, I'm glad to be here with y'all.
We're excited to see you as well. And thank you for taking time out on your Wednesday evening to chat with us. It's lovely to see you again. Did we lose your? We might have lost your sound for a second, but hopefully you're still there with me. Hey, Joe.
And here, by the way, here's a picture of us when you were here at Phantom History House, and we met you for the first time. It was so wonderful for you to be here. And so, anyway, now here you are again. You came with our wonderful friend Lynn Hanson, right?
Yes, I did, and I loved it there. Just fell in love with every room, but especially the graveyard room. I really felt moved in that room. So that when I come to visit, that's the room I want to stay in.
Love it.
It is yours. And yeah, I remember giving you the tour of the house, and we paused in that room for quite a while and chatted, and you just felt
and I got to be there.
And
the Orlando HWA chapter. Lynn took me in. I got to be there for that with Doug Ford and everybody, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, we loved getting to meet you. The Horror Writers meets here. Horror Writers Association of this part of the state meets here every now and then, and we love those guys. And
absolutely, yeah,
they're exciting.
Yeah. So, of course, we want to talk to you, Cindy, about so many things because you've done so much. You have so much talent, and you're just such a sweetheart on top of all of that. The first thing I want to do is congratulate you on your recent award, your Bram Stoker Award in short fiction. So congratulations.
Like, I know somebody that won the Stoker Award.
I know,
that's like this. I'm more excited for me than I am for you. I'm sorry. That's terrible. That is such bad form. I'm not really. But
both so much. Yes, thank y'all. Oh. I was so happy that this year happened to be the first year I ever got to attend. And I never thought they would call my name, so I was in shock. But it was such an honor.
Well, it's very, very cool. So can we jump to my first question?
Absolutely.
Okay, and everybody watching, please say hello and let us have any questions for Cindy about women in horror. We're going to talk about women in horror primarily, but I want to start, Cindy. I want to know, how did you get into all this? Like, were you into horror movies or scary books when you were a little, youngster? Or how did this all happen for you?
Well, as far as the storytelling part of it, that started before I could even read and write. I was really shy now, as I was as a child, even worse then. And on Sundays, that was the day that we would always go visiting kin people here in West Virginia. And instead of going outside and playing with all the cousins and everything, I wanted to stay inside and just kind of blend into the wall or hide under the table or whatever I needed to do to hear all the elders tell the stories, all the folklore about West Virginia and old wives' tales, all that kind of stuff. So I started telling stories before I could read and write. And then probably at about age 6, maybe a little bit too young, but my mother started me going to all the local drive-in theaters. There were 3 within driving distance. And every Saturday night, my 2 older sisters would be out on dates. I was the baby of the family. My dad would be with friends playing poker. And me and Mom would go to the drive-in. And whichever one was playing horror, that's where we would go. Wow. So she got me hooked on the horror movies. And then when I was old enough to read, I just fell in love with that. Anything I write, I take little bits of my experience growing up here in West Virginia and just add a little twist of horror to it. So there's pieces of me in just about everything I write. So that's how it came about for me.
So I have a question like that. That's so amazing. You were not the first person to tell us that when they were really young, they were watching really scary movies. Like we've had guests come here and stay with us at Phantom History House, and they'll talk about sneaking downstairs to watch the scary movie on TV when they weren't really supposed to be watching whatever. So do you have a memory of one of those movies that like really you still remember seeing, or any moment from one of those trips to the drive-in?
Yes, like I think I was 6 or 8 years old when I saw both The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Holy cow. That's like going in deep.
That's amazing.
Started out very young. I don't think it disturbed me too much. But anyway, it's odd the things that clicked with me and stuck with me the most. Like there were so many more scary parts in each movie. But like for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the part that stuck with me was the grandpa saying, whack her again. You know, the grandkids saying, whack her again. Grandpa trying to hit the woman in the back of the head to bleed her out and everything. That's what stuck with me, that scary grandpa. And then for The Exorcist, all of the head twisting and all that stuff, that's not what stuck with me. It was the noise in the attic. So any house we've lived in, if it has an attic or one of those pull down stairs, you know, that's what freaked me out. That's what stuck with me out of those two movies. The simple little things, you know.
I love that. Well, I think creepy sounds from the attic is really scary to, well, anybody, but especially a little kid.
Yeah.
And in this house, we have one of those pull down attics, but it's not in my bedroom at least.
That's good. You can at least sleep a little bit.
That's helpful.
And on the homestead in northern Maine, where we just moved from to be back home, it was in my youngest son's room. So he made sure to put a desk and stuff under that, so nothing could come out at night. So
You can never be too prepared.
Yeah,
for sure.
This is really cool.
I think we all did that as a kid. You know, I would like block my closet door when I was a kid because something had to be in there, even though nothing ever came out.
exactly.
Except for the time my sister scared the crap out of me when she did hide in there. But that's a whole other thing. So I love that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is brutal, but it also leaves a lot to imagination. And The Exorcist, which is terrifyingly visually scary, but there's also a lot of imagination there, that those resonated with you. Because I think those are my favorite kind of horror stories, are the ones that kind of get in your head. And it's like, I don't know what this thing looks like, but I know it's there and it's going to get me. So that's that kind of like how you relate to horror?
Oh, yes. I'm not, as far as what I write, it's not the blood and gore, it's the more suspenseful building up to what if, what's going to happen next, who is the bad guy, or the bad girl or the demon or whatever. It's not really about, all of the gory stuff. It's more of the suspenseful thriller, kind of Appalachian folk horror.
Yeah, which is very cool that you are, I think that gives you a distinctive voice in a certain setting that's really interesting to you. And of course, I guess most authors a lot of them write about things they know, right? And their own experiences and their own places they know. So that makes sense to me. And I'm happy to say that, you've turned out to be a lovely lady, so it's not like seeing The Exorcist as a child, like scarred you for life that I'm aware of. So everybody watching, we're talking to Cindy O'Quinn, who's a wonderful author. We're talking about women in horror. If you have any questions for her, of course, please type those in.
Yeah, and I've seen a few of them trickle in, and I want to say hello to Stephen and Kristen and Carol. And I said that Elijah has dropped in a couple of links where you can see some of Cindy's work, so make sure you check those out as well. Elijah's making our job a little easier.
Yeah,
so
love it. That's great.
So thank you for that. So were you going to ask something?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the women in horror part about our conversation tonight, because, I find this a little bit interesting because there's so many female authors out there, but it's the Stephen Kings and the Dean Kuntzes who get all of the attention, the media attention, things like that. And we were talking over dinner. I'm just like, Mary Shelley is like, she wrote Frankenstein. She is like the grandmother of horror, and she kind of seems to get buried sometimes, and which is frustrating.
Unappreciated, really, it seems.
Yeah.
Do you have that same impression?
I do, but I feel like it's changing. Over the past 100 years, 50 years, say, it's always been the men, certain age and everything, similar men that would get all of the attention. But I really feel a change is coming. And just like with the book that me and my fellow sisters of foreboding have discovered is, let's take, for example, in 2021, never in the history of the Horror Writers Association Bram Stoker Awards has there ever been a category where there were 5 women final nominees. Well, that all changed in 2021. And it was Lee Murray who won the Stoker, and Carol Geisander, Kylie Lee Ward, and Anna Taborska and myself. So that made history. And so we got together and we wrote a book by women, about women and their struggles. But they're all strong women. And it's like trying to balance the scales as far as it's always been tilted towards the men. Mm-hmm. And with this book, it kind of levels it out to an even playing field.
So here is the cover of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And what a great title.
Yes. And that Discontinue if Death Ensues, and I can't think of the author's name, but it was borrowed with permission from her poem. And then we added the Tales from the Tipping Point, because that's what we feel like it is. There is a tipping point happening right now. And more of these wonderful, talented horror writing women are getting noticed. And whenever I was at the Bram Stokers for the first time this year, I felt like I was just felt so honored to even be at the table where I was at. I was, it was before I had the surgery. The surgeon wanted me to have it in May. And I'm like, no, this is my first chance to go to the Stokers. It's in San Diego, my first time away from the East Coast. So it was the longest trip for me ever alone. And I spoke with Brian Matthews and told him, usually what happens whenever the banquet doors open, everybody rushes in and tries to find a table to sit. Well, I got with him because I had left my cane behind at the Bangor airport. And I said, is there any way that you can help me get to a table before those doors open? And he was so kind to do that for me. And he let me bring my friends, Jamal Hodge, Ace Antonio Ward, Linda D. Addison, Lynn Hansen. They all got to sit at that table with me. And lo and behold, I look up and there's Tananarive Due. I mean, the queen of horror, that she's been at it for 30, 40 years. And so that night I got to see history made again. And it was the first African-American woman to win in the novel category. And it just felt like magic. And then for my name to be called as well, I mean, it was just a magical night. And I just loved it. And to be there with those group of people at that table and to see, Tananarive go up and accept her award, which she went on to receive the Shirley Jackson Award for her book, The Reformatory, which is an excellent read. Everybody needs to read that. The Reformatory by Tananarive Due is so good. And it was a member of her family, I believe, that was in that reformatory school in Florida. And horrible things happened there. So,
and what's so fascinating about you bringing that up is we just had a guest here a couple weeks ago who was reading that book.
And was loving it. Talking about it.
And when she left, we went up to clean the room and she had left us a copy of that book. So it's on our list to read.
So it's in our library here at Phantom History House.
Very good.
And you're talking about reading it very soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Once I finish the book I'm reading, that's the next one I'm going to go into. Again, we love reading here, and anything that's so tangible and tied to history, of course, I really, really love.
Exactly. And for her, I think it was long overdue. And to be there with her when she got her first and I got my first, it was, I don't know, it was magical.
So you said there's a tipping point. Women authors are finally being noticed, being rewarded. Do you have an idea of what brought this to pass? Is it just finally time? Were there certain things that sort of pieces of the puzzle that you think brought this to be?
Well, I think it's a few things. People started really noticing who generally won everything. And it was time for other people to be noticed. All of the unknown people to be lifted and brought into the spotlight, and there's just so many women horror writers now that that need to have the spotlight shined on them, because they are so talented. And I feel like I don't know, it's just amazing that I'm included in the same group of all of these talented women. It's mind blowing. So.
Well, you're so sweet and so incredibly humble. I've had a chance to read some of your work, and it's well deserved. I read your award-winning short story, which was terrifying and heartbreaking and unpredictable. I mean, all the things that you want a good horror story to be. So I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I see the questions coming in on the chat. We're going to get those to in a second, but I wanted to ask one more question of you, Cindy. I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on what the female voice, the female perspective does for a horror story or a story in general. What is your take on that?
I think the female voice adds a whole new glance at horror and how it affects women, and not only just women, how it affects everybody. It just brings something new and refreshing to the genre that, of course, there are wonderful male writers. There always have been, but there's always been the women as well, but they just kind of remained in the shadows. And I think people are, finally recognizing that there's so much talent out there that tipping point is time to be leveled out. So, you can get to know so many more writers, because I was one of those constant readers. Stephen King was my first. I started on him when I was 11 and could not wait till each and every book came out afterwards. So, and I was really, he was the one for me until I got into this small horror community and started supporting all of my fellow horror writers in this small community and found voices that I connected with as well. And that was so refreshing, to have such a range of people that I read now. So I feel very
I love that too. And that's what we always joke about in our library here, is that we have, everything from the art of Disney to The Exorcist and everything in between, so a little bit of everything. Before we ask questions, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm loving this.
All right. Yeah. So like I said, I do see these questions trickling in. If you do have questions for us or for Cindy, please drop those in. We're going to, this question comes from Kristen Tortellini. Hey, Kristen, good to see you again. She wants to know if you have a favorite book that you yourself have written. And I'll expand upon that. Favorite book or favorite short story other than your award.
Are you allowed to, it's like picking your favorite child?
I would think so. That's a hard one.
Well, something you want to mention.
Okay. Well, as far as short stories go, I'm going to have to say what's interesting about there's two. What's interesting about The Bad Book, edited by John F.D. Taft, it was the submission call open for that, and you were to take a Bible story and turn it into something horror. And
wow.
I said to my husband was still alive at that point, and I said to him, I could never submit to that. What would my family think? Well, about a week later, John F.D. Taft sent me an invitation, and my husband just got the biggest kick out of that. So for me to write that and pick different verses and stuff out of the Bible and use it not only to be a learning experience, but also to see how far it could be taken literally, like the snake handling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of me in it. That little church on the mountain, that was real. And there's a whole lot of that story that actually did happen. Maybe not the ending, but and then the other, I think one of my favorites is The Thing I Found Along a Dirt Patch Road. A lot of me was woven in with that as well. And I lived near that covered bridge. I was an RN, and for her to go out on her daily walk and see something along the road that she knew shouldn't be there was it was that buildup of what was she going to find? What was she going to look down and see? What was this horrifying thing? And I won't say any more about it to give you any spoilers or anything, but that too was one of my favorites. And as far as novels, my first and only novel that's been published, I self-published, and that was Dark Cloud on Naked Creek. The name for that came in 1996 on my way to work. I was working at Merck at the time, and I crossed Naked Creek every day going to work. Well, one particular day, whenever I was crossing that bridge at Naked Creek, the clouds, I looked up and literally said, wow, the clouds are really hanging low today over Naked Creek. And that's where the title came from. And it was 20 years exactly later that that book was published. And it was like I had to live those 20 years before that story could be written, because it's about a woman that works in prisons, because I hadn't been to RN school yet at that time. So it's an RN. It's about an RN in West Virginia, of course, and she works in prisons. And she didn't like laying her hands on the offenders, because like whenever she would do their vital signs and stuff, if she touched them, she would see what they had done in their past or what they had planned to do in the future. So what she started questioning was these men started dying under her care, and she came to really believe that maybe she was killing them. So she has to go back and into the deep, deep, deep mountains of Appalachia to discover about where she really came from and what was in her bloodline. So that was a really special book for me. So,
and you have now made me want to go right out and get a copy. I mean, seriously, that's such a great, fascinating setup.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of got chill bumps over here.
That one is out of print, but in the near future, something special may be announced about that book.
Good to know. Okay, we'll keep our eyes and ears out.
Well, and we have a really interesting question from Carol, who's watching. Everybody, if you're watching, please type in your questions for Cindy. We're so loving having you here and having this conversation with you. So Carol asks, how much did your part of the country affect your writing? You've mentioned it many times, but do you want to speak specifically to your part of the country and how it's impacted you and what you've written?
Well, I think it's me. West Virginia, where I grew up and where I lived until 8 years ago, West Virginia and Virginia, that's all I knew. I didn't live anywhere else. We didn't travel much. We had no desire to venture far from home until my husband, retired and we moved to Northern Maine, which was also an excellent backdrop for writing horror because we lived on this really old working homestead. Right. And so I did a lot of writing there. I still need to write that New England Gothic horror, though, based on those 8 years on the homestead. But as far as everything else, it really comes from pieces of my experiences growing up and living in West Virginia. And, the majority of it has always been good experiences, or I wouldn't have returned home. I just take some of those experiences and twist them and add the horror, the suspense to it. And that's
writing about a setting that you're familiar with makes it so real, when you're able to weave in the fiction too. I mean, it just sets that groundwork. This question is a little bit challenging because it has specific numbers involved, so you don't have to name all of these things. But Stephen LaToy is watching. Hey, Stephen, thank you for tuning in. He is curious about 3 movies that influence your work and 3 authors that have done the same. Again, I don't think you have to name 3 and 3, but how do you respond to that?
All right. 3 books. I'm going to have to say the first Stephen King book I read, I think I was about 11, and it was Salem's Lot, which I believe was Jerusalem's Lot whenever it came out as a novel. But that one, because that was my first as far as real horror. When I was like in 2nd grade, Our field trip was to the public library, and I got to pick out my first novel myself, which was Where the Lilies Bloom. And it wasn't horror, but it was horrifying what those children went through to stay together. So that's number 2. And then I'm going to have to say number 3, as far as books go, is Tanner Reeves' The Reformatory. It's one of those must-read books. And let's see, the other thing was 3 movies.
Yeah, three movies that have impacted you.
Okay. All right. 3 movies. That's a hard one. I have so many favorites. Let's see. Clarice in Silence of the Lambs. I can narrate the whole movie, and my sons get so sick of it.
What a great film, and what a great performance by Jodie Foster. Wow.
Yes, I love Jodie and Anthony in that. You know, it kind of rooted for both. And what else? There's a few movies that I tend to watch over and over, especially the past 3 years. And one is it takes place in Maine, and it's called The Shut-In. And I've watched that one, I know, a dozen times, if not more, just in the past couple years. It's like one of those comfort movies you can just put on, and I don't know, it's a winter storm hits in Maine, and it just felt like I was there because I was living there at the time, you know.
You've experienced that stuff.
Exactly. And then I'm going to have to say The Exorcist. But that goes for the movie and the novel. I saw the movie first when I was 6 or 8 years old. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s when I finally read the novel. Happened upon, there's only one bookstore, or there was, for like the first 7 years we lived in northern Maine. There was only one bookstore north of Bangor, and it was a used bookstore. And I found a first edition of The Exorcist. It's missing the slipcase, but I found the first edition, and I read it. And I was so glad that I had seen seen the movie first, because it just went so well with the novel. You know, they both went well together. So did I name 3 books yet? Okay.
You did.
What was this one?
That was a hard one.
No, that was really interesting. No, I love that.
Yeah. And, you know, and I love that, you know, you have such respect for these other authors and creators of these worlds, and, you know, that you're able to find inspiration from that. And, you know, the authors that we've met, we love to see how encouraging they are of each other in the work that everybody does. Like when the groups meet here, there's always a lot of cheering on of who's working on what, which is very refreshing, you know, in the world.
Yeah, it's a wonderful atmosphere. Everybody's for everybody and supporting everybody.
Exactly. It's like whenever the period starts, whenever you start recommending books for the HWA Bram Stoker reading list, it's like everybody wins when that first person reads your work and feels so moved to recommend it, to even be on that reading list, you know, much less for it to go on to the preliminary ballot or the final nominee ballot. You've already won when someone reads it. And I felt that whenever I went to StokerCon, I immediately felt like I was among family. And I had been isolated for so many years on that homestead. I literally turned into a recluse. I didn't want to leave. And for me to take that giant step and fly clear to San Diego, scared to death. But then as soon as I was there, I received one hug after the next. And people kept saying, "Hey, you are real." Because, you know, nobody had ever met me. I hadn't done any readings or conventions and stuff like that. So many people said, "We were beginning to think you were a bot or something, you know, you weren't real." So meeting everybody in person, they just welcomed me and helped me, just took me by the hand and got me through that weekend.
Yeah.
And Linda D. Addison and Jamal Hodge and Ace Antonio Ward and Lisa Wood and Lynn Hanson, they all they carried me through that weekend because, you know, I do have a lot of anxiety. And unless I'm like one or two people on one, you know, like this, but when it's a large group, you know, I get really anxious, but they could sense it. They would just take me by the hand and carry me through it. And everybody there was a winner, you know, and everybody rooted for each other. And no matter what name was called, everybody was going to be happy for whoever, you know, got the statue, you know. And I don't know, really is a family, the horror community. It seems it's small, but once I started going to conventions and stuff, I realized just how loving it was and how understanding they are of mental health and anxiety and things like that everybody deals with. But it's really prevalent in the horror community. But they're all so supportive and just took me in, and I felt like one of them.
Well, now, I mean, I think that's wonderful. And I do feel like I've been so impressed with the horror community that I have met and how supportive and caring and like they are. And I think that the general public might think that that's not how a horror author is going to be, you know, but I think that's very cool. But also, don't you think that I would guess that horror authors think about these things, you know, that the way the mind works and the way that your fears and anxieties. And so it would be very familiar. And I think they would be especially understanding of all of those pieces of how we all work.
Exactly. And that's how I deal with a lot of the anxiety and stress and depression and stuff. I feel like if I could get some of this stuff out of my mind and on paper, it's healing to me.
Right.
And even if I twist everything around a little bit, it's getting pieces of that out and out of my system and on paper, telling a story. And it's healing for me to be able to do it.
Well, and that's what Doug Ford and the other authors that come here have said is they feel like horror authors are really well-rounded people because they get it out onto the page, and that's very therapeutic. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me.
Exactly. So I've been writing forever, and it wasn't until we moved to Northern Maine that I published my first work. Sanitarium magazine published my novel at The Handshake, and it was, I don't know, it was like once I was finally willing to let go of things that I wrote and they started getting published, it was like a release for me. And, you know, I'm always going to write whether people buy the work or not. And it's something I have to do, you know, to stay grounded. It's just part of me.
Yeah, but I think all creative people know that feeling. You know, you're creating something and you're saying, okay, world, you do, and now I'm going to put it out there for you to judge and comment. And like, that's a very scary thing that all creative people do. And I think it's wonderful that you took that chance and people responded. And then you realized like, okay, it's safe for me to share myself and be this vulnerable.
And I've been so hesitant because I have this West Virginia accent that I could not scrub away if I wanted to. If I had people like Bob Ford and Al Goingback and Thomas Tessier, they really were the force behind me, pushing me, saying, Cindy, own that voice, own that accent, and let the world hear it.
Right.
And I have to applaud them for getting me to this point. Because if it wasn't for them, you know, giving me that shove to keep going, not be afraid to talk, you know, not be afraid of people not being able, you know, to connect with my kind of writing.
Right.
But like R.B. Wood, he has been so good to me. My work has connected with him, and he's had me on Sudden Fiction Podcast 4 times, and we're working on other things together. And it's just truly an honor for people to connect with my way of writing. All I do is just take pieces of myself my experience and add the horror or the supernatural to it. But
well, and that ties into a question we just got in from Ronald Kelly a little bit ago. He says, "Hello, Cindy. Do you believe your return to the mountains of West Virginia will energize your creativity and spawn?"
absolutely, absolutely. I am so glad to be back. Like I say, I was so isolated there. And for whenever I discovered Ron Kelly, to hear somebody that had my kind of voice, oh, it was like, there are people like me out there writing horror. And whenever I got to meet Ron, I just gushed on and on, to hear a familiar voice.
Right.
And it was just great.
Well, in his comment, he says, "If so, I'm here for it." So he is very excited about that.
I think we all are. No, I think that's so cool. People are responding to your writing, and that you're being authentic and real and talking about, and like that's so just how lovely, It's like people like me.
Well, it's having that connection to a writer. And this is a question from Susan, who is watching on YouTube. It's kind of a two-parter. And hello, Susan. She's one of my fellow Halloween fans. We were talking earlier about.
Thanks, Susan, for being here tonight and asking questions.
So her question is: I know VC Andrew isn't a horror writer, but Flowers in the Attic and all of her series books, Dawn series, I have all those books and still do. Have you ever read her books? And then she follows up with Charlene Harris, who wrote the True Blood series. Those are so good. So what are your thoughts on those two authors?
Now, when I was a teenager, I read some of V.C. Andrews and, of course, watched the movies as well and enjoyed that. As far as True Blood, I did not read the novels. I did watch the series, and I really liked it. But, yes, those deserve a lot of credit as well. They were there, like V.C. was there for decades now. And so, those were really good as well. Yeah.
And I think we all, Flowers in the Attic was such a disturbing tale. It was not, so to her point, it wasn't horror. It was just super uncomfortable and well done as it was presented that way.
Right.
Yeah. One of those that sticks with you for a while. There's a few more questions we want to get to. And I want to point out, Stephen LaCroix points out that the statue that you won is in the background on your bookshelf behind you.
Yes, it is. The bookshelf behind me is all of my work that I have in anthologies, poetry collection that I wrote myself. The novel Dark Cloud on Naked Creek is up there. And the poetry collection Foundlings that I did with Steph Ellis, who lives in Wales, it's up there as well. So there's charity anthologies there that help lift women and domestic violence and everything. So yeah, I'm proud of all of those pieces there behind me. Every anthology, every collection. Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot. You're so impressive, Cindy. I mean, that's why we were excited to have you on tonight, of course. So I have a question that might seem stupid, I'm afraid. But I'm going to ask I'm going to be vulnerable too, and I'm going to ask my question.
There are no stupid questions.
Well, I don't know. No, so here's my question. Say I've never read anything by Cindy O'Quinn, and I want to have my first experience. Do you want to make a suggestion for me? Start here?
Well, I think one of the most unique anthologies that I ended up in, back in the day, like in the 50s, they would do anthologies where they were read blindly. They would strip all the identifiers off of them. So there were no spots saved for big name writers. So all the stories were read blind, and they were chosen simply on the story, no name connected. Well, whenever, let's see, John McElveen of Haverhill House, him and James A. Moore and Christopher Golden decided to do the Twisted Book of Shadows. They decided to do it that way. So they received 900 submissions worldwide. And for that story, I wrote Lydia. And that ended up being my first nomination for the Bram Stoker Award.
Wow.
I would start there. And it was one of those stories that the first sentence was stuck in my mind. And I'm like, it was a question. Did I ever tell you about the time? And I sat down and I wrote that in 3 hours and set it aside. And, I waited a bit and went back and looked at it and just made a couple of corrections and left it be. And that's the one I submitted to that anthology. And from those 900, it kept getting narrowed down to 500, to 300, to 200, and until it was down to like 50. They narrowed it on down to 19, and I happened to be one of them. And that anthology, like I say, that was my first nomination for a Stoker. And that anthology itself, because it was so unique, it went on to win the Shirley Jackson Award for anthologies that year.
Wow.
So I would start with the Twisted Book of Shadows.
That's a great example. So now I have a follow-up question. I write music. This is my creative outlet, right? So I'm a musician. Right. I write music for bands to play, for high school bands to play, typically. So you just mentioned how you sat down and this story sort of just poured out of you in 3 hour span. My experience is that if I'm working and I sort of get in that flow and I have the ideas sort of in my head somehow and they just flow off the page, that a lot of times that really is a good thing for me. It's like something very natural and is happening. I'm not struggling. Is that the case for your writing as well?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. That's a good answer.
Right now, it's a struggle. And I'm going to just make excuses because I'm procrastinating here and I have a novella coming due very soon and that I've not finished yet. So I'm going to make excuses and blame this big move, the surgery, and trying to get this place set up as our home. I'm struggling with that one. But sometimes it will flow just like Lydia did. It'll start with the first line or it'll start with the title of the story itself. And it's funny you mentioned music because sometimes a song will get stuck in my head. And I'm like, I'm supposed to write a story and it's going to have, a little bit of that song in it. Well, for months, A Wayfaring Stranger kept playing in my head over and over. So I'm like, okay, let me look this up on YouTube and see who all did it. Johnny Cash, a whole bunch of people did it. And I ended up coming up with A Wayfaring Woman. And that is also one of my favorite stories because it's a woman that had it hard when she was young. And she decided to step out on her own into the Appalachian Mountains and live off nature and learn all about herbs and all that kind of good stuff. And because she was mistreated when she was young, she had a really soft spot in her heart for women and children that were abused. So if somebody was being abused, she would eventually get wind of it somehow. And she would help that woman out from underneath her problem with a little bit of help from the herbs she carried around with her. So,
Cool.
Yeah. So
but
sometimes
that was such a lovely answer. I loved that because sometimes I do have to really work at something and it still turns out great. So I didn't mean like it has to be, but sometimes it can be such a wonderful experience when something just comes pouring out like that. That's nice.
Yeah. And that's the way it was with Lydia and A Wayfaring Woman and several of them. But then there's others that, like A Dark Cloud on Naked Creek. It took 20 years for that to become a novel because I had to live through a lot of stuff first to get to that point. And now I have the novella coming due, and soon I'll have another secret project, which I'm working on that'll be due. I'm also working on a novel with an excellent writer. I won't name names, but there's a whole lot that is going to keep me busy for at least the next year, projects and everything. So I'm really thankful for that.
Well, and there's so much discipline involved with something like this, with writing music, with writing novels or short stories. I mean, my day job is I write, but it's more journalistic writing rather than creative writing. And I've done some creative writing, which is fun, but it's very, very challenging for me at least. And so I'm very impressed with your commitment to it and how you're able to develop these stories. And I guess one of my last questions for you is, when you create a character for these stories, how attached are you to these characters? Because I always wonder when I'm reading a horror book and this person has these horrible things happen to them, or they have this horrible death befall them, I'm like, did that author just not like this character or what? So I'm curious.
Because you do hear about authors talk about how they're so sad to leave characters behind at the end of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Of course.
Exactly. And I'm the same way. I get really attached, and it's kind of odd how it works. Whenever I sit down at the computer and I'll start writing, and I have all of these characters in my mind, and they're all poking at the back of my eyes saying, my turn, each of them want their turn on the page. It's like they take over the story and they lead me through it as to who lives, who dies. It's just bizarre how that works. And yes, they stay with me. And sometimes they'll say, hey, we're not done with that story yet. You need to do another part. You need to expand it. You need to do a sequel or something. But yes, they stick with me.
Well, I love how you described that they sort of tell you. That's such an interesting way to think about the process.
Yeah.
It's like, sometimes I'll have that first line or I'll have that title. But once my fingers hit the keys, they take over. And that sounds kind of creepy, but that's really how it works for me.
Well, it's on theme. It's creepy.
It's there.
I love that you talked about being inspired by a song sometimes. That makes me really happy as a musician. That's really cool. I just realized how long we've been talking. Yeah. I feel like we're abusing your goodwill by talking to you so long. It's just so interesting.
Oh, no. I enjoy talking to y'all so much. You're so kind, and I just appreciate it.
Well, and we certainly hope to see you again at Phantom History House very soon. I'm really hoping.
I'm hoping just about the whole month of October, I will be really busy going to conventions. I'll be at Spooky Empire with Doug Ford and them. And that's like the mid part of October. And then in the beginning, I will be, I think that's when I'm in Ohio. I will be there for a convention. And then in between the two, I want to come stay with y'all.
Hope so. That would
And
be awesome.
then near the end of October, I may be in New Jersey somewhere for another thing. Yes. That one didn't pin down yet, so I won't say anything else about it, but hopefully that'll really happen as well.
Well, I love that you're so busy. I love that you're out and about and interacting with people and getting all that love from people when they see you. I think that's really healthy, and I'm really happy about that for you.
Absolutely. And of course, I want to remind everybody that there's some links in the chat on YouTube and on Facebook where you can learn more about Cindy and check out her previous works as well as her upcoming anthology. And Cindy, I wanted to give you a chance to let people know where they can find you. Social media, website, where would you like to direct people to keep up with what you have?
I'm probably the most active on Facebook. Just type in Cindy O'Quinn and you'll see me. I think I'm at the Stokers at the time, and me and Linda Addison. Jamal Hodge caught the best picture ever. It was whenever I finally got back to my seat, Linda helped me up on stage and got me back to my seat, and we were just hugging head to head, looking down at this statue like it's a precious little baby. And that'll be what they find when they type in Cindy O'Quinn on Facebook. There's several, but that'll be me. And so Facebook and the others I'm on, like Instagram and Blue Sky and Threads and X, and I'm on all of them, but most active on Facebook. So.
And of course, Phantom History is connected to you as well. So if you're following Phantom History, look through our connections, you'll find Cindy there as well.
And
this
then,
has been delightful.
It has. It's been so much fun.
It's so much fun. Thank you for taking all this time to explain all this. And now I want to read like every book. Like I'm gonna,
absolutely.
I mean, this is really.
Well, I hope you do, and I hope everybody watching will pre-order Discontinue with Death Ensues. by the Sisters of Foreboding. And one of them had done an interview, I think it was for Cemetery Dance, and they were talking about the 5 short stories for that year. And they mentioned how all 5 of our stories were so foreboding. And that's how we were dubbed the Sisters of Foreboding. So anyway, that one's up for pre-order. It comes out in September, and I hope everybody will order it, read it, and love it.
And that's a beautiful cover too. I love that
really
cover.
cool.
Yeah.
Yes, and Lynn Hansen did the little circle part in the front, and then whenever it comes out, I believe in paperback, there'll be an illustration by Lynn as well. And so, yeah, I really like the cover as well too.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
All of Lynn's work is beautiful.
Well, thank you, everybody who's been watching. Thank you for typing in your questions and being a part of the conversation. We are trying to do this every Wednesday night at 7 Eastern, and so we have some great guests lined up coming up.
We do.
Please.
So next week we're going to have a conversation. I have to double check my information here. We're going to talk with a ufologist to learn a little bit about UFOs and phenomena that we may not completely understand. And then the week after that, we're going to talk to a cryptozoologist. So we have some very
Which
interesting,
is
think Mothman, Bigfoot, things that are lurking that you that live in West Virginia.
Exactly.
Cindy's neighborhood is really what we're going to be talking about.
Well, Cindy, this was super, super fun. Thank you for spending time with us. You were just wonderful.
Well, thank y'all for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I
was scared to death. But y'all kept me calm.
You are a pro.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, you can do this anytime now. You know, and you were great at this. So
we're gonna start calling it the Today Show. Get you set up.
I'll give you all the credit for.
Well, it was wonderful, and thank you everybody for watching. Hope to see you every Wednesday night whenever we can.
Absolutely, and take a look at our event calendar. It's Halloween season,
That's
and
right.
Start making your plans. We'd love to have you here at Phantom History House.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.